Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me well and you can see my presentation. I wish you a good afternoon, and I would like to thank the organizers for this invitation and for this opportunity to talk to you about the skills of our workforces in 2030. My name is Daniel Samaan. I'm indeed an economist at the International Labour Organization in Geneva. There are a few things that you may find interesting about my presentation. First, I'm trying to take a global perspective. So I am looking at what I call megatrends that are relevant across the world, but which may have different impacts in different parts of the world. Secondly, based on these megatrends, I am trying to devise labor market scenarios. So I don't want to try to predict the future, but think about different possible futures. And the point is that we need to prepare the workforce for these different scenarios. With this, I will look in particular, leave the global scope and look in particular on Europe, European country in 2030. It could be Latvia, it could be another European country. And finally, I would like to emphasize that I'm trying to move a little bit away from digitalization as a major topic of the future of work. I think we are too narrowly focusing on technology. I think there are very other important megatrends that shape the labor markets of the future. Starting with this idea, here are 4 megatrends that I think are relevant. And you could break that down further, but I think the most important ones are digitalization or the technology, of course. Critical for me are the demographic shifts that we're currently going through. We have some societies in Europe and in the United States that are rapidly aging, so we will see a shrinking labor supply in these countries. We have other countries, South Asia, India, etc., where we have growing populations. So the labor force is going to expand there, and it will be difficult to provide enough jobs. Then we have climate change or environmental degradation. This will play an important role. And finally, the global trade system, globalization. It seems that we are moving away from this unified globalization to something else. So you have these 4 megatrends, and not only that you have to look at all of them, but they can play out differently if you put them together. We could spend now the whole afternoon trying to come up with different scenarios, but I just want to make you aware that it is important not to look, for example, at digital technologies and robots, for example, and think about which kind of jobs could these robots replace. You can't look at this in isolation. You may have digital tools in an environment where you suddenly have to focus on resource productivity and you want to use those tools for resource productivity increases instead of labor productivity increases. So you may think about these tools differently. Of course, you can have robots or digital tools in an aging society where your labor supply shrinks, and you can have it in a growing population. So those are the 4 structural megatrends that I see. And then, of course, to make things more complicated, we are living in a world of fundamental uncertainty, so to speak. So you have other shocks that you don't have on the agenda and that you need to be prepared for. You may find yourself in a situation where you suddenly need more health workers, you may need more doctors, more vaccination specialists, etc. There is COVID. I just heard you were talking about the war in Ukraine, which of course has also tremendous impact on economies and labor markets, and which most people didn't have on the agenda, or not to the scale as we are unfortunately seeing the events there. So let's take this and now think about what could that mean for Europe. I made up a scenario. I don't have the time to go through this with you in every detail. I took the 4 megatrends, and I think I have good arguments why I think they play out the way they do, but I can just throw this at you right now. Let's take climate change. I think for overall, it's going to get warmer in many parts of the world, but that won't be the case for Europe. I think the impacts are still small. We're unlikely to face a situation like we saw recently in India with a heat wave, where you still have a large share of the workforce employed in agriculture and outside, where they're directly impacted by this. That may be down the road for Europe, but not at the moment. Demographics I already mentioned. I think this is a factor that is really completely underestimated by policymakers and corporate leaders. We have rapidly aging societies in Europe. The average worker in 2030 will be about 50 years old. So people will be closer to retirement if we keep the current retirement age than to entering the labor markets. And this is the kind of people that you have to deal with. This is the workforce in 2030. And at the other end, around Europe, you have very young and fast growing populations in economies that are not very stable and that are likely not to be able to provide the number of jobs that we need. So my prediction here is that we may end up in a scenario where you will have significantly increased migration to Europe. Partly that's a good thing because of the aging societies that we have. But are we prepared for that? How to integrate these people, how to make sure that you actually get those people into the labor market that you want to have. Globalization, very quickly, I think we're moving away from the unified globalization. It's more likely that we have a bipolar world with different technological, environmental, and social standards. Digitalization, again, we could talk all afternoon about that, but we are moving to smaller organizations, individualized output, more direct connections, more decentralization, and we are getting rid of intermediaries in terms of organizations, but also intermediaries within organizations. The middlemen are going to be cut out. I think this is a possible scenario for Europe in 2030. And on this basis, now let's think about what kind of workforce do we need for this scenario. I have a very specific definition of skills. These terms are not always used the same way. So I make a distinction between skills and tasks and abilities and knowledge. So a skill is the capacity of a person to use her abilities, her knowledge, experience, and training to carry out particular tasks in a certain context. And the tasks are going to change, I think, quite dramatically over the next 10 years. So you need to ask yourselves these, I think, 4 questions when you want to think about the workforce. Which are the most relevant economic sectors? Which products and services do our societies need? What technologies are we using, and what kind of organizational structures are we using? And then if we prepare for these scenarios, you're trying to get the workforce that can help us to provide the output that we want. Again, the time is not sufficient to go through this in detail. My point here is I wanted to take those mega trends and there's ideas that I presented to you and think about, okay, how could that play out in such a scenario in Europe? Let me just take 1 or 2 of those examples. So let's focus on demographics. Again, I didn't take digitalization for a purpose. So if we have this aging society, we will probably need a much larger care sector. We will need more guardians. We need remote assistance of people that want to still live at home, transport services, age-appropriate residencies. We will probably need a larger health sector. We need doctors, we need nurses, we need health specialists. Same for migration. We may need technical education teachers, lawyers, border protection officers. It's not the case that we only need programmers and AI specialists. We may need those as well, but let's think about these skills and the workforce a little bit broader. So if you look at those occupations and you say, yes, that's realistic, you know, probably those are scenarios that are possible in the future. I used the US database ONET. Many of you may know it. I really like this database. It's very sophisticated. It lists existing occupations in the United States and links them to skills, to tasks, to education levels, etc. So I threw in the occupations that I just showed you, which I think we probably need in the next 10 years. And I looked what kind of skills would be needed for that. And without going through, so don't read the slide in detail, just to take 4 or 5 of them, you know, active listening is very important. Critical thinking is very important. Those are basic skills that we already train today. Social perceptiveness, technical skills, of course, which is a cross-functional skill. So those are skills that we need for the jobs that I just presented before. And I mean, a point for me, or what I want to emphasize here, is that this is not something fundamentally different from what we are or what we should be focusing on already today in terms of foundational skills. Again, the tasks are probably going to change, and I'm saying a few more words to that, about this. So now, in the last few minutes that I have for my presentation, I do want to spend some time on this idea of the race of the humans and the machines, which dominates the discussion on the future of work and on skills, etc. My view is that we will see more of a transformation of work rather than a replacement of jobs and skills. So there will be a reshuffling of the things that humans do and the things that machines do. And we will use the machines for the things that they have a comparative advantage in, and we will use the humans in which they have a comparative advantage in. And this is not rocket science. We already know. I listed a few things here. You know, what are machines good at? They're good at computing. They have been good at that for the last decades. Maybe some people still know there used to be a human occupation called computer. We don't have it anymore because machines can do that much better. Handling large amounts of data, same context problems, correlations, those are things that that machines know much better or can do much better than us. But there's enough for humans, personal communication, changing context, causality, no data or small data set problems that are tasks that humans will be handling in the future. This is the last slide before I come to my conclusion. So, okay, in this whole context, so I was talking about foundational skills, so to speak, you know, active listening, analytical reasoning, etc. These things that we're already aware of today and that we should be training our people already today. So what about these digital skills? I'll say a little bit sarcastically, I didn't find a definition for digital skills. So people use digital skills in various contexts for different things. Here are 5 that I think are reasonable and I have found in the literature and heard in different discussions about the future of work, what digital skills are. First, some people say, oh, this means that you are able, or people are capable of using a certain digital technology. They know how to use a computer. They can, you know, work with a certain program. They can navigate themselves through the internet and find data in the internet, etc., etc. I think that's all true, and I think that's important, but it's nothing I would worry about. The most digital technologies are very user-friendly. So I'm not particularly worried about that we end up in a generation where people are not able to use these tools. I think here it's critical that people are getting access to these tools. So, you know, the no digital divide, not some people have these tools, some people have computers, some people have access to the internet and others don't. But to provide some anecdotal evidence, you know, my parents are both older than 70. And if you give them a computer and you give them a computer program, they're pretty good at figuring this out themselves. My 4-year-old daughter, if she takes my cell phone, if I don't pay attention, you know, half an hour later, she's taking videos, opening apps, etc., etc. So I'm a bit joking around here, but you know, I'm not worried that people will be in a situation where they don't know how to use this technology. I think that is completely exaggerated. Second point is the creation, maintenance, and development of digital technology. So those are the famous programmers and AI specialists, etc. We need more of those clearly, but it will remain a small part of the workforce. I mean, think about the automobile. We have some people that produce them, that develop them, that repair them, but for most people, it will be fine. Like me, I can drive it. I know a little bit the physics around it. That will be enough. We don't have to have everybody being a programmer. So that's another area of, or another way, or another definition of digital tools. Then this is what refers to the slide before, and which I think is very important, the capacity to perform tasks that are not carried out by digital technologies. So digital technologies have these comparative advantages, like computing, for example, and others, for example, causality, they can't help you with that. So I think this is a digital skill. So exactly not the computer skills, but the ones that the computer cannot do. I think that's a very important point, to make sure that the skills are there, that people can perform these tasks. Another thing you hear less, which I think is very important, evaluation and interpretation of output produced by digital technologies. We have systems that already do a lot of the analysis and give you a decision or give you some output, but you still have a human being that needs to interpret that. And I think we need to make sure that people are capable of doing that. And finally, ethical considerations. I think this is getting more and more important in labor market environments, whether it's hiring, but also in many other contexts in which we use digital technologies. We have more and more ethical considerations, and we need to have people that are helping us to navigate through that. But ethics, again, it's a century-old subject. If you want to know something about ethics, it's very good to take books of the old philosophers, etc., and to use this knowledge in a new context, which is more in the context of digital technology. Just to summarize, and I hope I stayed in my time limits. So my conclusions are: prepare for different labor market scenarios. Don't try to predict specific skills or technologies. Don't try to predict the futures. You won't be able to do so anyway. Think in terms of scenarios. Concentrate, especially for policymakers, on providing a strong institutional framework, not trying to teach a person a very particular thing, but rather to have the institutions, the data, the way to anticipate the communication between enterprises and education system, have a strong institutional framework to prepare the workforce for the future. Overall, my prediction is that the basic skills and the skills foundations are not likely to change that dramatically. Still, reading is important, mathematics is important, analytical thinking is important, critical thinking is important, etc. And I would nevertheless not deny that the digital technologies are going to bring a lot of new and different tasks in the future that we need to be able to deal with. Thank you very much for your attention, and I hope that I could provide some material for thought. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. And we've had some questions come in on Slido. Parsla.
Yes, we did. Daniel, thank you. A very interesting material. And I think one thing which I will take with me from your presentation is that the work is transforming, but it's not disappearing. So we have a couple of questions which we have received. So I need to pick. I was said I can only ask you two. So let's take the third one, which is on the list. How do you believe we as a society, or we as the people who are very engaged into the topic of skills, how should we successfully communicate? What kind of skills are needed for the people on the job market?
I hope it came out a little bit from my presentation. I'm actually very conservative on this. I would take people first the scare of computers and this technology. I think people are able to learn a lot of new things. I think we are underestimating the ability of people to shift to new tasks. And in terms of education, as I said, I'm a bit conservative and classical. I would stay with what we know. Learn mathematics, learn languages, and learn the foundations. And it's a little bit a cliche, but try to be prepared to be able to adapt in the future. And with this knowledge, I mean, for example, I learned at the university, I learned Turbo Pascal to program. I've never used that, but I did get some insights from that, which allow me today to use this programming understanding in completely different contexts. And I think that's the way we need to prepare the workforce in terms of skills.
And I think it's you make a very valid point in terms of then rather than organizations trying to hunt a perfect candidate, they should be putting much more effort into really upskilling their existing workforce. There was another question related to that, previous speaker also was telling quite a lot about the gap between what actually is required in the market and what skills people have. So what would be your suggestion or your thoughts around how to speed that up? How to speed up the reskilling?
Yeah, so this is what I would this is what I understand as the shift of tasks. So it's clear that suddenly in my job I have to do new things, and for some of these things I may be less prepared than for others. In general, again, I'm very confident in that people are able to do that. But what I think may be different to the past is that more often in our lives we have to go through these changes. And it may be possible, and this is this term of lifelong learning that also has been around for decades now, that we may have to take people out of their working environment and again more into a formal training. For example, mathematics. People learn it once at school and then they never use it again. And the idea is that that'll be enough for 60 years of working life. And here, we can think about new concepts. For example, that people have, it could be through the social security system, that they have some credit, because it's a question of financing also, where they can get out of their job and re-educate them for a time being in a formal setting. And this could also be combined with training of the enterprise. I cannot specify that in detail, but I think there are some ways to help people adapt to the new tasks through the institutional framework.
Great. Put people back into the schools so that they refresh their basic skills. That is your suggestion then.
Yeah.
Thank you.